Who were responsible to MG12 were very select people in various branches of the intelligence community, the military and military department. So it was very compartmented. It wasn't some huge operation.
MJ12 supervised several agencies involved in various aspects of the UFO phenomenon. But only the 12 Majestic members knew the whole story, and they reported only to the President on a need-to-know basis.
One of the reasons that there are so few leaks is that 9 out of 10 people are loyal Americans when they sign a security oath, and they are rigorously defending what they've agreed to. Namely, they're not going to tell anybody. And so therefore, really only 1 out of 1,000 persons ever gets close to leaking the story.
One of the most stunning documents that arrived in Tim Cooper's mailbox was the first annual report of the Majestic 12 operation. And this was a primary report and then 3 annexes comprising 17 pages. Many unusual commentaries were included. Everything from missing soldiers to airplanes that have been shot down while chasing UFOs. There's a section called Government Policy of Control and Denial.
One of the most difficult aspects of controlling the perception in the public's mind of government attempts of denial and ignorance is actual control of the press.
People ask, how on earth would you keep a secret like that so long? And the way they did it was to begin with the security procedures that we developed during the Manhattan Engineering Project for the first atomic bomb. Compartmentalization, to tell each group only a little bit of the story, so hardly anybody has the big picture. And then, of course, security tests, security oaths, fines, and ultimately threats.
There's a section called Constitutional and Domestic Issues, and it states,
in dealing with clear violations of civic law and guarantees as defined under the Constitution, it has been discussed among members of Majestic 12 that such protection of individual rights are outweighed by the nature of the threat.
Clearly, they thought that ETs landing or being involved in the American citizenry was so important that they would control, capture, and manage every aspect of that interaction.
It's a very interesting group of people. 6 civilian, 6 military, 2 Air Force, 2 Army, 2 Navy. And some of them were very well known, but some of them weren't very well known, but turned out to be perfectly appropriate.
As President-elect Dwight Eisenhower was preparing to take office, he was briefed about the ongoing UFO investigations of this elite group.
I believe the Eisenhower briefing document is genuine. The list of members, I thought that would indicate it was phony because Dr. Donald Menzel, a Harvard University professor of astronomy, was listed as a member. But he was a total skeptic. He wrote 3 anti-UFO books. You certainly don't need a security clearance to teach astronomy at Harvard.
First of all, the objects are not unidentified. We know what they are. Second, in many cases, in most cases, are not flying. And finally, in many cases, they are not even material objects.
I discovered, to my total amazement, that he led a double life, that he worked with the National Security Agency, worked with the CIA, had a top-secret ultra clearance, did classified work for 30 companies. None of this was known.
By the time Eisenhower read this above top-secret document, the founder of the Majestic 12, James Forrestal, was dead. In March of 1949, he was diagnosed with depression and ordered to the Bethesda Naval Hospital. He was isolated and feared for his life. On May 22nd, his body was found below his hospital window. His death was ruled a suicide, but this CIA memo tells a different story.
The untimely death of Secretary Forrestal was deemed necessary and regrettable.
If it should ever be possible to prove that the documents are true, then obviously they indicate a very, very different history than we thought. They indicate layers of government we don't know exist. They indicate procedures of government that seem anti-constitutional. They paint a picture of a world that is wildly different than the average person expects. and of course also a world in which there are aliens flying around and being captured and studied by government forces. It's a very odd picture indeed.
I'm convinced, based upon the evidence that's building up, that something very strange has happened, that the number of sightings of all types are just out of all proportion to something that, if it's not real, there's something very, very strange going on. So it is the preponderance of evidence. It is the old-timers coming forward. It is the documents that Bob and Ryan Wood are putting together that, with powerful forensic research, make a very, very powerful case. It's hard to ignore.
We have selected the techniques that question document examiners use, and we've hired some question document examiners. And those techniques are very powerful because they permit a judge in a courtroom to tell the difference between a genuine document and a fake document. The degrees of authenticity can be determined by comparison of the specialized stamps, file numbers, date formats, line spacing, and paragraphing with known authentic archival documents. File markings are often particularly telling. Some of the documents have misspelled words. Does this mean they're frauds? We don't think so. These originals are probably rough drafts, which would have typos and temporary spellings until the final draft was complete. One of the things that question document examiners do to authenticate documents is to look at the type. And so when you study the typography and become familiar with how the hot lead printing presses of that era worked, you find that once every so often there was a letter Z that was raised because it was not commonly used. We found a document from that era that shows a raised Z, and we have in our own document about every third Z is raised. This is just exactly the kind of thing that telegraphs authenticity.
If you're talking about leaked documents, the provenance of leaked documents, we need to know where they've come from. We need to see the originals, and one has to admit that in 99% of cases we do not see the originals.
We have several documents that are original pages. These permit testing that cannot be done with copies. For example, we can date a document by analyzing its ink. A small sample is punched out, leaving a pinhole in the paper. The ink is then dissolved, and by using liquid chromatography, the colors are compared with a standard library of inks. The imprint made by the individual typewriter keys can be used to compare with a library of typewriter fonts. The watermark on the paper can often be found and dated. Sometimes we can even see through the blacked out areas and decipher the hidden words.
During the authentication process of the Eisenhower briefing document, Stan Friedman went to the National Archives and, in the presence of an archivist, found in their files what's known as the Cutler-Twining Memo, which mentions MJ-12, MJ-12 Special Studies Group. We have an original onion skin paper with the appropriate watermarks, original declassification markings. It is a hard, physical, testable piece of paper. It's in a secure facility at our National Archives in College Park, Maryland.
This declassified document seems to provide proof that MJ-12 was a reality, even though the government has never acknowledged its existence.
So, after you use these question document techniques, to the best of your ability, it turns out that the documents almost speak for themselves as being genuine.
If the majestic documents are real, they provide new insight into perhaps the most closely guarded secret in the history of the world, a secret that has been fiercely protected for a very long time.
I think that government secrecy, classifying this information at what amounts to an above top secret level, was absolutely warranted in 1947, and maybe earlier, because I think all this business got started perhaps during the Second World War.
It is the recommendation of the President's Special Panel, with concurrence from Majestic 12, that a policy of strict denial of the events surfacing from Roswell, New Mexico, and any other incident of such caliber be enforced. An interactive program of controlled releases to the media, in such fashion to discredit any civilian investigation, be instituted in accordance with the provisions of the 1947 National Security Act.
Certainly in 1947, the government could not afford to tell the world. They could not afford to say, look, there are these alien spacecraft penetrating our airspace. We don't know where they're from, what they want, or how they operate, but we thought you'd like to know. That would have been totally irresponsible. But there's no question it was justified at the time until they had answers.
I think it's quite possible that much secrecy is due to the fact that the authorities do not have all the answers. That they cannot be certain from a day-to-day basis or even a year-to-year basis or whatever as to precisely what is going on.
By the mid-1960s, the government's apparent interest in UFOs was waning, but a rash of new sightings of unexplained lights and moving objects reignited the debate.
We are being observed by some type of device which is ahead of us, far ahead of us, and is probably controlled by a highly advanced superior civilization. Now, this is a conclusion which I personally have stated and is shared by some members of our Board of Governors and advisors, not all of them. But it has reached to the point where many people in the Air Force have the same conclusion. In fact, the Air Force at one time had a top-secret estimate that these things were interplanetary spaceships.
Based on what is known of the technology and intelligence of the visitors, it is fairly certain that there will be other sightings and encounters of a spectacular nature. As to the purpose and modus operandi, we are not certain, but it is clear that if these visitors had conquest in mind, it would not be difficult for them, given their ability to penetrate our airspace at will.
I think that now it's evolved into a more multi-layered problem. Part of it dealing with high technology projects and keeping them secure. If they tell the public a few things, there would be a clamor for more information that might jeopardize the security of these programs. Another problem is that the fact that they've covered it up so long would create a sort of backlash against the government and the intelligence establishment.
If these documents show a long, systematic, highly articulated process for handling UFO-related information, for sequestering that information, for marshaling it here and there, and for keeping everybody else out of the loop, completely unaware, the structure that caused that to occur is a phenomenon in world history.
I think the MJ-12 documents are extraordinarily important. Probably the most important government documents ever leaked to the public, because they make clear, if they're genuine, that the United States has known that aliens are visiting Earth, that they are not perfect, obviously at least one crash.